Awesome, though. I think we are ready to kick it off. Let's start with some intro. So, yeah, welcome to the dev stream. Woo! Sorry, hopefully, I guess that could be motion sick. I'll try to do that less. We'll start with a little bit of who we are, who you're talking to today, and we have a brand new person who has never been on the dev stream before. Luke, do you want to introduce yourself?
I would love to. Hey everyone, yeah, I'm Luke. I'm a game engineer here. I've been working at Treehouse for, God, how long has it been? Pretty long time. A few years at least.
At least three. We started at almost the same
Oh
time.
my God, 3 years. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, we did. I think we started like a month apart from one another, so it's
Mm-hmm.
been a pretty long time. I actually came in as like a back-end engineer doing back-end stuff, and I still, I guess, very occasionally dabble in that. But now the vast majority of my time is doing like game engineering, so like game features and stuff. Since I've been here so long, I've touched most parts of the game probably in one way or another. Uh, yeah, but I also do a lot of work on the UI stuff, especially like the implementation of like, hey, we want to have this, look this way, and it'll often come to me to like make that happen. So yeah, that's why I'm talking about UI UX today. This is also my first stream, so very exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And then I'm, I guess, a frequent caller. But my name is Stephanie. If you haven't seen a dev stream before that I've been in, I'm the producer at Treehouse. So I typically handle a lot of planning and road mapping and what we're shipping and when. I do a lot of interfacing with you guys on the Discord. So I think you probably have seen me in there answering your questions on the Steam discussion forums and stuff too. But I do a little bit of anything and everything, sometimes including UX design, actually. We are a really small team and we don't have a dedicated UX designer. So we kind of have a collective of people that are passionate about UX and UI, and that is how we get by. And including a lot of great community members that are willing to help us and give us feedback too. So I am our producer slash QA manager slash UX designer here to talk to you today with Luke. And there's a lot of other people on our team actually that work and help a lot on the UI, but we can only fit like so many people in one dev stream. So maybe we'll have them come on and talk another time too. But I just wanted to give a shout out because a lot of people come together to make UI and UX happen in our game and to make a lot of improvements. But we're the ones you're talking to today.
Yeah.
Awesome. And yeah, and I think the main topic of the stream, just to prime you a little bit, because like obviously there's a lot of stuff we could talk about, and we could talk about features and feedback and a bunch of stuff like that. But what we're going to talk about today, oh, thanks for the follow, is UI development through game dev phases. Because this is kind of what we thought would be the most interesting to share and give you a little behind the scenes look on what it's like to go through, prototyping something when you kind of barely know what it is, but obviously you need some UI to be able to play it. Otherwise, like, how do you actually like test it? All the way through, hey, we actually want to like make this a real feature that people can like really play. What does that process look like? So we're gonna talk through a little bit of like what it looks like from the very first phase when we're just concepting a feature, how we support that all the way to how do we bring it to the community and get a bunch of awesome community feedback and make it better. And Luke, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I would love to. So what we're looking at here is probably one of, if not the first kind of passes at our crafting station UI. So this is, you're in the game, you go up to your crafting station, you interact with it, and you want to craft something. Um, and this is what it looked like, I don't know, probably when I joined or around that time, like 3 years ago. Um, as you can see, if we're being charitable, it does not look the best. It looks like an engineer made it, which is certainly what happened. Um, we have like, one recipe here, the healing potion, and I think you click it to craft it. You can close the window, you have your inventory over here. Um, yeah, but kind of hard to figure out what's going on, kind of hard to use, and definitely just overall looks really bad. And in some ways, that's actually like intentional. When we're putting together a menu like this, typically we're not even actually testing the feature. So in this case, we're not testing crafting. We're not trying to make a good looking crafting menu. We're not even trying to make a good crafting experience. But what happens is that we're in this situation where we're making a survival crafting game. So we know that we need, the basic core loop of like you go out into the world, you collect resources, you come back, you craft them to stronger resources. So that means that you can go out and go out farther, fight bigger monsters, and collect even more for the next time. And in order to get that core loop working, you need to have crafting, but it's not a thing that we're testing at that time. So like we need to have the crafting, it needs to be functional, but we don't really care what it looks like. We don't care that it's intuitive. We just need to have it in the game so that we can test other features. So in this case, like, we're making a healing potion. What we really want to test is like, are these good ingredients that go into the healing potion? Are there enough of them in the world? Does the healing potion work? Etc. That's what we're trying to test. And the crafting station is just a way to get the potion, and we need to have it in the game functional so that we can do internal testing on other features. Um, so typically, from a development standpoint, what this will look like is an engineer like me or someone else will end up getting assigned the task of like, hey, we need to have crafting in our game. Can you
Help.
put together yeah, exactly, help. Can you put together some kind of UI that lets us do that so that we can test these other things that we actually care about right now? Because games change so much over the course of their development. Certainly, our game has. You don't want to put more effort in than you need at the start because things might change as you go on. So that's how you get a menu like this that is one that you hopefully don't end the game with. This is the starting point, and it makes for a good before and after. So
So we could
that's
definitely
where,
put this back in if you guys really like this, so just let us know in the chat if you would rather have this one. I feel like Luke could do that.
yeah, yeah, we're
What
very
could it
open to
cost?
feedback. We gotta please know.
Yeah, and I think
This is like, yeah,
one important thing too, and I think you touched on it a little bit, but yeah, it's kind of interesting to be in this phase. And I think actually, like Grace said in the chat, it's almost like our temporary wireframe, but it's even maybe a step before that because it's like we basically try to spend as little time as possible on this version because we don't even know how like the needs of it itself are going to evolve, and you'll probably actually observe through a couple different screenshots on the board we've added and removed like tons of features actually to this system over time. So even like as we're developing it, we may know that okay, cool, bare minimum right now we need a crafting system, but like, does it have, I don't know, rarities? Does it have random outcomes? Does it need to be powered? Does it need to do all of these other things? And actually, we have no idea at this phase when we were making this one. We were just like, cool, we need to go collect stuff and make stuff, and that's all we know when we're kind of at this really really early phase when we're actually even just trying to figure out, does the shape of the game work? Does, yeah, like Luke said, trying to fight these like kind of bigger battles of like, is the thing we're making even fun? So we spend basically as little time as possible setting this part up, which sometimes is a little tough because there's like a balance of tech investment versus like playability, versus like expense, that we always have to be weighing a little bit while we're developing.
and we don't even always spell potion correctly here. Just for the
I
added.
didn't even notice that actually.
It's funny. I'm sure that like at the time we were making this, we said specifically like, "Hey, it's fine. It can look bad because no one's ever going to see it." And now here
And
we
here
are,
we are.
streaming it out to our what I think is hundreds of thousands of Twitch viewers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's the latest.
Mhm. um And so yeah, speaking of that kind of like starting small, and kind of expanding over time, Luke, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how that evolves with like the prototype itself?
Yes. Um, yeah. So this is right here, kind of our, I don't know, our next iteration maybe, or at least a few iterations past. Whereas the previous one looked uh, kind of simple but bad, had a kind of charm to it. I would say this one looks like
Look at
it's got a lot going on. It looks
that.
like a bit of a disaster. We have our yeah, we have the name extending out the side here past this icon. We have like tons of stuff on the screen. I don't even know what's going on here. Um, we have this big blocked text. Uh, yeah, so like, how did this happen? Um, And in this phase, we're still not trying to make the menu look good. So if you look at this and you're like, it didn't look good, that's the point. Um, a lot of
It's
the point of
art.
game dev, yeah, is to is to make things not look good. It turns out. Uh, but when we're in the kind of prototyping phase, we're still trying to figure out the general shape of the game. We're still trying to figure out like the big features that our game has and what this means in practice because it's really hard to just sit down and think really hard and then come up with the perfect game design. Maybe some people can do it, but I can't do it, and I think that you know most people can't. So what we end up doing is we have these ideas, we put them in the game, and we test them. Basically, we do an internal play test, and people are like, "Is this fun? Is this not fun?" And then we like either iterate on those ideas or like drop them and try different ideas. And so we're doing that all the time. We usually have like I don't know multiple things going, and probably most of the things that we've tried, don't end up making it into the actual final game. We just try them, then we're done. But of course, when you're trying something, it's usually not totally isolated. Like you're trying to make a change, it usually affects other parts of the game because the game is, a big web of connected stuff. And, in a survival crafting game, crafting is super important. And so a lot of these other features will come in and they'll end up affecting crafting. And so at this point in the game, we're still not worried that much about the experience of crafting, about making it look good, about even really making it like feel good or be intuitive. We just care about the functionality still. And so when we're developing these other features, what we end up doing if they affect crafting is we end up kind of stapling stuff onto the crafting system in order to do testing for other features. So what you're actually seeing here is like the remnants of an old system called the aspect system, which we don't have to get a ton into like how that worked. But it was a thing that we were trying that was a way of like powering up your crafting stations to change what you can craft. And it tied into building and all these other things. You can imagine like if you're doing that, you need some way to communicate all of this information to the player. So we have like these tags on recipes that say like what level they are and what aspect type they have. We have this like progress bar that goes up. We show like the gear rarity that you're crafting. It's all these like other systems that we were trying out that we bolted on to the crafting menu in order to like get the information so that we can play test. And what happens is you have like a really complicated menu with tons of stuff on them from these, this graveyard of features that you've tried out and then not ended up using in the final game. Um, so that's kind of how it how you get to a point like this where the menu looks like a total mess. Definitely just in general and like UI UX design. One of the really challenging things is not just finding out like what to add on the menu, but also what to take away from it. Because as you're designing the menu, you want to kind of focus the player on the important bits of information, which often means taking stuff away or figuring out when to display it and when not to display it. But certainly in this part of the development process, we're not thinking about that at all. It's just like all of the information all the time so that we can unlock the ability to test these other features. Um, so yeah, that's how you get stuff like the giant locked text just over the top of everything and 100 things going on at once.
Yeah, and I think it is pretty funny because sometimes we don't even hit this bar for developers. But yeah, generally too, our goal is like legible for developers playing,
Mhm.
because just like yeah, Luke mentioned, just like playtesters play, we also playtest the game a lot, and sometimes depending on the phase of development, we playtest a lot, and we're constantly trying to give feedback on the features and trying to decide like yes, is this thing good enough to like stay around? So because we have like a lot of context and information about what the systems are. Like sometimes we can even like have a design doc, like up on our other monitor, like while we're playtesting something if we need to. Um, they're not always like what does this icon mean? No normal human would know. But a developer would know because we were working directly on this thing, so we kind of know exactly what it means. So yeah, it has to be just legible enough that like you get that playtest kind of back and forth, that response of like, oh, I did the thing, and so like now I understand how the system changed or how like my action changed in the system. But definitely not ready for like normal human consumption, I would say.
Yeah. And one thing that I think we often run into, or maybe not often, but occasionally run into, is that we are trying to hit that bar of a developer can understand it. And sometimes with given features, we had trouble even hitting that bar, which often was a signal that we had to look back at the feature because it was too complicated. If you have this feature and it's very hard to communicate to the player through, you know, whatever it is, through UI, through UX, through anything like that, it's often a sign that the feature itself needs to take, you need to take a second look at it and figure out like, okay, can we simplify the feature itself because it's so hard to communicate? And certainly if you can't hit the bar that like developers who understand the game kind of top to bottom understand it, then you're probably never going to be able to get to the point where, a player coming in totally fresh will be able to understand it.
Yeah. Which speaking of, what about totally fresh players? So there always comes a time, yeah, in this phase where, it started actually pretty small for us, and I think even honestly, we probably shipped some version of a UI that must have looked similar to like this to some poor, unfortunate group of people. um, but especially as we like try to prep a build for external playtests, and maybe we're not even still locked into the feature at that point because we're hoping, through playtests we're gonna like learn, do people like it? Do they not? Should we expand this feature? Should we remove it? Should we change it? We're often trying to like kind of inch the UI and the UX along the path to like be better, be more legible, while still trying not yet at this phase to like overinvest because there's always the risk basically if we spend a lot of time making something super nice that we're gonna have to throw it away, especially if like the feedback isn't good about it. So this is kind of always an interesting, I think, point where we're almost like bartering. I would say the feeling is at this phase of like, okay, like what's like the least understandable part of this? What can we do? What's like, how many days should we spend on this? And like, is that worth what it's going to take away from other features? So we kind of like try to take, something maybe that was more similar on this side when it started and try to just nudge it a little bit in the direction that maybe we hopefully want to go, in a direction we hope is a little bit more readable. Can, yeah, do some of the things like Luke was saying, like provide a little more focus to people as they're playtesting, so that they can actually like focus on what is correct. So we kind of focus a little bit more on like the visual clarity, and that's how we kind of come out with a pass that's more similar to this. You can actually see some of the components, actually stayed similar, especially because we weren't really ready to like revamp these things to take all of this information away, because we also weren't ready to like replace it with other tools that people need to be able to like understand, like, do I have like the resources to craft a thing? Oh, okay, we need our inventory up because we're like not 100% sure that that's going to be clear enough. We have like our resource depot, which is like your kind of global storage. It's like, oh, we have to have that up because we're like not sure if it's going to be clear enough that people know that they like that it's going to pull resources from there. So we kind of try to figure out what needs to stay so that people playtesting, especially with like a lot less information than us, can still play. What needs to go away because it's going to be like really confusing and distracting for people. So we kind of do this like nudge it along. So like this was, I think, one pass that we did before we did some of our bigger but non-public playtests, where we were kind of slowly expanding our Discord group, and we kind of nudged it along this way. A big shout out to Billy because I think he did a lot of help nudging this UI in a good direction. And then, before the public demo, we're like, oh, okay, maybe like this one isn't so bad. There's like some things we could improve here. It's missing some functionality, but it definitely is not. Even you can see on the like left-hand panel, it doesn't look like the other UIs. It's not like the other girls. And we're like, that's a little weird for a totally public-facing demo to have something kind of looking so mismatched. That's like almost, that's like confusing in and of itself. So we kind of did another pass just focused on like, hey, how do we get this to be like as close to our other screens and like be more streamlined so that people coming into the game are not going to be like surprised or like jump scared when they like open a screen and they're like, what the hell is this? There's like this whole kind of phase we go in where we're like, okay, cool. We don't want to like totally rip out this UI. We don't have time for that, and we're not sure necessarily like what all of the features still need to be. Like maybe that's even still evolving. Like actually you can see these tabs here, which have like all and then these like probably weird symbols that like people don't know what they are. They were actually like the rarity tiers for the items. Which I think right now the tabs are a little defunct, but we were not sure yet if like, hey, are we gonna keep those, remove those? Like how much effort is it even to remove those? So we kind of left that in. Massage that a little bit so it's like a little less confusing. It doesn't default to a weird tab, but we're like, hey, we're not ready to quite rip that out yet. So we left this in, even though it wasn't perfect information. So it's just kind of like, what can we do a little bit to slowly push it in the direction we want and make it a little more clear without having to like, spend maybe up to 2 weeks of like really valuable development time where we could be working on gameplay features, we could be adding more content for people to play, we could be fixing bugs, which I'm sure a lot of people experienced some really fun bugs in the demo. So that's a little bit of like, as we're kind of ramping up into like a real public playtest format, the types of trade-offs we have to talk about all the time on the team of, how are we going to try to bring up the clarity? How are we going to try to deliver as much value as we can and be able to get the feedback that we want, because that's the most important thing about doing these external playtests. Is not just like shipping it. Shipping it is almost like its own achievement. Like, okay, cool, we did it. We like know we can ship a thing, and that's really great. But the whole goal is to be able to get feedback. So if there's something that is going to prevent us from getting feedback on a feature, either it's too confusing, too unclear, or just doesn't work, those are the types of things when we're trying to gear up for an external playtest that we're really focusing on, because we really want to hear what people think, and we don't want them to be like distracted or hampered by things that, ultimately we don't even like want feedback on yet, or like not as important as like, how do you feel about the game? Are you excited about the gameplay? Do you understand how important spirits are? So it's always a balance between how do we kind of get the most bang for our buck and get the feedback that we want. Luke, is there anything you wanted to add there? Any thoughts you had?
No, I think you covered that very well, Steph, as
Nice.
usual.
I was like, I hope so. I said so many words. If I didn't, we're doomed. So speaking of gathering feedback too, so I mean, as a bunch of you know, because a bunch of you have played the demo and are in our Discord and have filled out our surveys, and thank you so much for doing that. Yeah, the kind of like next phase of like, where does this go now that we're kind of like, we've readied it for an external release, is like actually getting it out there and trying to get it in front of people to get feedback on it. And we got so much actually valuable feedback. Some things, we expected and it makes sense. Like, oh, I wish there were more macros for the UI because like this game has that. Or this one I think we didn't expect to be so much of a problem, but it makes sense after watching the stream. Where the F is the fuel gauge? How do I find it? I don't know how to put fuel in the station. I don't know what fuel even is. So a lot of learning comes in this phase where we're like really trying to understand what problems are people hitting, and how does that kind of factor into our future plans, because when we are moving a UI from like a very in development phase to like, okay, maybe we know enough about this feature, maybe we really want to take a swing at like making the real version. A step that we always want to take is that we're actually like making sure we're incorporating solutions to like real player problems, because it is really easy to like design like a really cool, a really pretty UI, or not really easy, but it's like one thing to design a pretty UI, but if it's not addressing that like real problems that people are facing while they're playing the game, then it's kind of like a failure of that system, or even like the why you would want to change it, because we know that people are having like a lot of issues or have a lot of feedback or needs out of this system, and we really want to make sure that like the next version we do is geared towards not just like streamlining the UI or not just removing features we no longer want, but also really getting at the heart of what people are experiencing in the game currently and making that experience better. And also, I know there's a couple questions coming up in the side chat. And first time chatters, thank you for coming to our stream. We'll get to some of the questions at the end, so I'll try to go back in the chat and revisit those. So sorry about that, but we have a little bit of Q&A time set aside near the end for that. So we are reading it though. And even it's interesting in this phase too, because some of the feedback is just about the UI itself, like, hey, this UI is unclear. Yeah, I'm missing macros. Makes sense. But there's actually like lots of types of feedback that we get in this phase too, and the answer isn't always just like fix the UI. So a big problem that like Luke has to like work with us all the time to solve is like, it's not just that like players are like, hey, I don't like the size of this. Hey, I want more hotkeys. It's like the UI is unresponsive. And that's actually not the fault of like the UI itself or like the assets, but it's actually like a game architecture problem. Like the game waits on the server to respond before it performs an action. And so it's not just a UI change actually that's going to fix that, it's a technical change. So it's kind of an interesting thing when we're in this phase and getting a bunch of this feedback, because people don't even always know which parts of these things are causing like their problems. So we always kind of have to take in a bunch of this feedback and bring a bunch of people actually together, usually art, engineering, and design, to be like, hey, what are the problems people are facing, and like what are the actual causes of why this is happening, and is our solve in a art solution, is it in a design solution, or is it in a tech solution? And Luke, I don't know if you want me to play either any of these videos or if you want to go over that part more.
Yeah, you can. These aren't related to this specific menu, but just an example of the kind of what you were just talking about with smoothness. The first one will be called not smooth. There is the probably what's in the current, I think, demo version of the game, in the crafting menu. or, well, any menu with an inventory. So your inventory menu, the crafting menu, anything like that. When you interact with the inventory, it does what you were talking about, where it does like um, a full call to the server and back. So if you pick up something from your inventory and put it in another inventory, for example, because the server, that is the host, I guess in this case, the host is the one who's responsible for um, having the source of truth on what is or is not in inventory. Um, any action a client takes has to go back and forth from the host in order to do any interaction. So if you're playing by yourself, you're hosting your own server, you won't really see any latency. But if you have ever played where you're a client and somebody else is hosting, you'll notice that a bunch of the UI in the current version of the demo is kind of has like, I guess, a laggy feel, you'd call it. You do something and it seems like it takes half a second for the action to actually finish. Um, and yeah, that's because we were doing this round trip in order to like verify that the actions are good. But what should be available in the next version of the demo is a much smoother experience where we actually do some client-side prediction. So when you pick something up on the client, it will like expect that you correctly picked it up, and it will only make the server kind of verify that what has happened has actually happened. So from a player experience, you get much more fluidity with the UI. It feels much more responsive, all of that kind of stuff. And none of the changes there are directly like UI related. They're a technical change, but it's from feedback we were getting that was kind of directed at the UI specifically, like, hey, this feels unresponsive. So that's just like another thing that you have to look out for in all of the UI. Sometimes UI can like solve problems in other parts of the game, and sometimes problems in other parts of the game can like make the UI reflect badly.
Also, yeah, I knew it was different, but watching the videos like back to back, it really is so much better in the new version.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. The
amazing.
old way is not good. Uh,
Someone said they also like the new arrow design too. Did you
oh
make
yeah,
that asset, Luke?
I did make that asset. It may be temp. I put all the assets I do are kind of temporary, but occasionally I will make assets despite not being on the art team. But I'm glad you like the new arrow. I think it does look better to have like a custom cursor versus just the default one.
Yeah, Luke
That's how you know you're a real game.
is a magical engineer who also can do some like vector art and also does some UX design himself in the game. Does a ton of stuff. Luke is
Yeah,
awesome.
occasionally.
I feel like often. um, so let's talk a little bit. So we talked about this, like, we got a bunch of this feedback. We're identifying these problems. What do we do with that? This is just one part of that because, as we mentioned, sometimes the solves are like technical, but also, yes, sometimes they are in like the UI and the communication of the mechanics. So we go into this phase, and sometimes we're doing some initial wireframes, like for those early versions, but usually it's like really simple. It's like on a whiteboard, maybe you're just like doing a sketch, or even just sometimes like, I don't know, in the editor, like moving boxes around. It's not really like what I would call like a full wireframing phase where we're really thinking deeply about the design and like why we're doing certain things, and even some new technical requirements that might come from that. So we start to go into this phase where we're really trying to like finalize the design direction for it, knowing that probably still, even at this phase, honestly, like some of these features could change, new features might come up, but we're kind of being like, we think we know enough today to like start to take the next step forward. So we align on goals and requirements and constraints, like things that are like, hey, technically you just like can't do this, um, or requirements like, hey, it has to be able to do this, this, and this at least. And like we're saying, we kind of look at a bunch of these problems and feedback and everything we've collected and like understand now about how people are experiencing the game, and we try to incorporate solutions to player problems. And we have a couple like of examples through different periods of time where we worked on some kind of like jam boards and stuff that we just thought might be fun to like share. Because before, what you see in the game even today, or even like going from like this version, there's so many assets in these boards. We do, yeah, a wireframing phase, and a wireframing phase can vary a lot. And um, I'll just be fully transparent. I'm again not a UX designer by trade. Sorry for anyone in the chat who is, but I think there's a wide spectrum of types of fidelity you can have in wireframes, and so we've kind of found this like working model for ourselves, and this is what works for us. But I would not say like you could take any of this and just like go be a UX designer somewhere, because I cannot teach you enough about this. Oh my god, I didn't even know this was on this board. But so we kind of think about some of these things, and like even so, an example of a constraint actually in this wireframe, and one that you'll see actually later we start to like phase out, but we had to do kind of two versions, is long term we actually don't want this inventory to have to be up ideally, because players actually don't have to pick up an item from their inventory in the most cases, and put it into the recipe manually. There's some exceptions on this screen, like fuel, that you do need to kind of like input a material, but actually otherwise you primarily don't interact with the inventory at all. And it takes up a ton of real estate, and it's actually really confusing that it's there, because people expect like, oh well, the screen is there, it's on my screen, they clearly want me to interact with it. So we saw actually a lot of poor people in the build trying to be like, oh, I have to craft, let me pick up the thing from the inventory and put it into the crafting bench, and then it like just falls on the ground because you're not supposed to do that. And so like long term we actually don't want this screen on here, but we need to take technical steps on the back end to like make features that would allow us to actually like remove this screen and be able to like input these items another way. So like we actually had to do mock-ups of kind of both versions, where we had the inventory up on one screen and then a version without the inventory on the other screen, and like how would players actually interface with that and why is that better. So we kind of do a lot of phases of wireframing and kind of layout changes and trying to figure out like how we should communicate the content there and like what's going to be the most clear. And actually, you can see just a couple different like layouts across a few of these screens, like one that has like a crafting queue and a completed items queue, one that has a a max button and a craft all. We have a couple different versions, ones that incorporate spirit slotting, ones that incorporate fuel, ones that even indicate maybe how we should communicate what a spirit is giving you. So we kind of do lots of versions of these wireframes to try to figure out what's like the right combination of layout we like and supports the features we need and feels like really intelligible. And then someone amazing like Mitch Miller, our art director, will come in and do what we would call like a high fidelity mock of this with like real art assets. So he's like in Photoshop. This is like not a functional UI at this point. This is just like, he's like, hey, if I'm going to make the visual direction for this and kind of take the wireframe from, just like boxes and flat colors to like what I think it should look like in the game, Mitch does a pass like this, where he actually kind of like incorporates the details and figures out how to communicate them, figures out the visual hierarchy, the color palettes, all of that stuff kind of happens through Mitch. And very rarely do we mock up with his assets. And you can even actually see sometimes when we're having these meetings, this is going to be a little chaos. But we even have to like, sometimes there's like different decisions that you could actually make that really impact the direction of the UI. So like sometimes we'll have to like come in and outline like, hey, what are like the branches of decisions we could make here? Based off of that, what's like the impact or the pros and cons, and like what do we have to plan? So, all during this process, we're trying to figure out like, oh, do these have to be two different UIs or could they be the same one? What can we like get for that? Both it's like a player win because like players will understand it more, and it's a scope win because hopefully we don't have to build something like big and extra different. But if we do build a custom UI, there's like a decision branch that kind of happens there. Or like if we do this functionality, like we want to support randomized roles on the refiners, like we need engineering support, or we have like a technical question about that. So there's a lot of kind of process and ideation that goes in, and even sometimes I think Luke, actually, you did some of this edit on Mitch's
This is our new direction for icons as well. We're just going to take stock images off of Google and use them for our food.
Yeah. So hopefully everybody likes that. It's like unhinged like burger. But yeah, like even people come into these boards though, right? And they like do paint overs of the UI and try to like kind of go back and forth on like what is the right direction. And often we have to do lots of sets of screens, especially when they have really overlapping functionality. So this section actually was like, hey, we realized this milestone is going to be really crafting, really refining, heavy. So we actually did mocks of like all of the types of generators and screens that resembled this, so we could actually get an idea of like, hey, what should all of these look like when they kind of come together. So that was kind of like one just like fun example we thought we could show. And I think there's like another similar one, that we touched on this a little bit but didn't really talk about it. But a big part, honestly, of trying to figure out what direction and like what things work is referencing other games too. There's a lot of survival crafting games out there. Some have really great UI, some have really terrible UI, and honestly, you can learn a lot from both of those. And so we take a lot of reference from games like Lego Fortnite, Pal World, Valheim, Conan, Once Human, even, which is like kind of like similar but different from our game. And sometimes we even look like well outside of survival crafting genre too, just depending on like what are the types of things we're trying to learn when we do a reference, like what do we think that they do well, and how do we incorporate that into kind of like what we're aiming to like update on our screens. So reference taking is also definitely a really big part of kind of even understanding like what tools could be available to us to communicate some of these mechanics to players. What game is that at the bottom right? You mean this one? That's our game. This was one where I imagined a very high scope version of the Spirit Anchor menu, where you literally saw the Spirit Anchor in the middle, and you would slot the spirits, and they would show up as like little dudes on the screen. Oh, we couldn't. That was too much. But yeah, that's custom Steph art. You're welcome. um, and then yeah, I mean after we kind of do that, then it kind of goes into Luke's hands, and he does a lot of the heavy lifting. Luke, do you want to kind of talk through what happens next?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I think the real big sea change is that kind of previously we'd added crafting into the game basically because we needed to test other features correctly. And so we were just kind of like building it up, whatever. But after we've done those wireframes, kind of the idea with the wireframes is that we're like, okay, we've tested those other things. We're pretty sure about the direction of crafting in general and like the features that are going to tie into it. So how do we now actually make the experience how we want it? Um, and so once we've done that with the mockup, it comes time to actually like try it, basically. So, and this is like where I come kind of back in, which is okay, we have this mockup now. Let's try to make something that's actually functional in game that is as close to the mockup as we can make it, um, and then try it out, basically. Because like any other feature in the game, it's much easier to kind of sit there and think about something and think it's going to be great. But often you'll think it's great and then you do a playtest with it and maybe it doesn't work. So we're kind of applying that same process, but we're now doing it for the crafting UX specifically. Um, so up here at this kind of image we're looking at now, this is like the first pass at getting us close to those mock-up images that we were just looking at. So you can see it's pretty close here. We do still have the inventory on the left-hand side of the screen, which we're eventually trying to get rid of. We kind of needed it because there are still a few features that required it at this point. But we're approaching the mock-up, and so we put this in a build. We get a bunch of, the developers, everyone on our team to play it, and they basically give feedback. So this is what our feedback form that we always that we make for new features looks like. We have these questions that are a little bit specific, but we also ask for general feedback at the end, and then everybody goes through and answers them. Fortunately, the feedback for this was actually pretty good. People liked the new menu. They thought it was like more clear. It had a lot less. It was less busy. Had less stuff going on. Some of the big things that changed are like we don't separate the output inventory from the crafting queue anymore, which is one of the options that we were looking at that Steph was talking about a minute ago. We changed how each of the things look. So like how you know a craft is complete, how you know you can like cancel a craft midway or collect partway through a craft. Um, the way that we display recipes, all of that. And so we're really looking for feedback on any of that, and anything else that people can think of. Um, and this is the first step with feedback is always from like the developers because it's like I guess easiest to get it built out people who work in the company, and it can be like, not as good, which is often the case. So that's always the first step. So we get the feedback from like the 15 or so people that we can. But often we even from like a pretty small group, we get some pretty good stuff. So here you can see like a piece of feedback from Brandon, where he's mentioning like, hey, we really shouldn't have like the scroll wheel or the scroll bar already visible if we only have a few recipes at the top. We really only want to have that if like you actually have more recipes that are worth scrolling to, and that's like super good feedback. We got some others from like Ryan up there who mentions that the in the crafting queue, the little bar that goes across a craft, so you know how far along it is. Like it works on some of the lighter colored icons, like the ingots, but on some of the icons that have like a really dark background, it's super hard to see the bar as it's going across. So you don't know like how much progress you've made. So that's super good feedback. We also are looking for like bugs or anything that actually does not work as you expect, because we often surface that kind of thing as well, even if we've tried to make it work fully. Um, but yeah, this kind of feedback process is like the thing, like the engine that drives the whole game. And so now we're like, the big step here is that we're now applying it to the UX of, in this case, the crafting station. But we do this with all of the UX we have, eventually once we reach the point where we're ready to. But fortunately, the feedback here was pretty good. And so we
Oh,
were
I
able
didn't
to move
finish my
on.
sentence in this one. Oh, my alt
you were
tab
you were
syndrome.
so in awe of the changes that you just like stopped mid sentence,
I was like,
and had
wow.
to bask in it. I think
Yeah,
that's what
it's
you
true.
told me afterwards. I think so. So that's where we got to.
That's so funny.
Yeah, the feedback is really fun. You can see people even like upload screenshots that they've taken and draw on them and stuff to communicate better um, what they mean. So this was super great, but the feedback here was pretty good. And so the next step really was to, okay, feedback here is pretty good. Let's implement some of the information we got into another iteration, and do the last push to get it looking as close as possible to the mock-ups that we had made. And so that's what we have here in these two images. The top one here is the crafting station, and the bottom one is the refiner. The big difference here is that the refiner still has a spirit slot, and it also has a crafting queue, so things don't craft instantly. They kind of like they go into the queue and they craft over time. This is like pretty close to the mockup now. And actually, the version in game, even this picture from a few days ago is a little out of date, because I did just put an update in today to add those like little, how do you call them, the little like arrow
Oh,
buttons
yeah.
for
I
the
was
kind of
wondering if
menu
we
we
were
want
going to
to
see
have.
the fresh content or not.
Yeah, I should have added it to this mirror board if I was smart, but unfortunately I'm not, and I didn't. Um, but yeah, as you can see, we're constantly like updating this stuff and trying new things. But this menu here has some changes. You'll notice we don't have the scroll bar anymore for these, so we implemented like Brandon's feedback. We updated the show locked recipes to like no longer be a like to just have an icon now instead of a like a long
Checkbox with text.
checkbox with text. You actually can't see it in these images, but we also updated the crafting queue, the little bar that goes across now. It's still like a dark bar, but it kind of pulses, so it goes from like almost black to like pretty light, which means that it's much easier to see just in general, but also on a dark background because you have like the motion that I think also sells the fact that this is crafting. Um, so even when we get pretty good feedback, like in this case, all the little things do add up, especially when we're trying to make like a final menu. And so I'm like, I feel like this menu that we made, even then like one version ago that was pretty similar, is like, head and shoulders above the last one. I guess also the other big change here is we got rid of the inventory, which also helps make it look a lot cleaner, which we were finally able to do as well in this iteration. Um, yeah, so that this is like almost where we're at now, but we're not actually done with the iteration process. Pretty much every feature in a game you could like iterate indefinitely on, and we kind of do. We iterate a long time. Um, so we've had this phase of iteration. We'll probably do another look at this internally, but the next big step is to get this into a build that's going out to everyone listening, basically, external people, as many people as we can get eyes on as possible. Because that's the real test. People who don't have the underlying context necessarily, who don't already know how the systems work, if they feel like the change is better, if they feel like there are still things that aren't working as well as they should be, if they're confused or not confused, all of that stuff. And so that's the next step for this menu. And even knowing that, there are a few questions that we're hoping to get answers to when we ship it out. In addition to the basics of like, does it work? So you can see I actually wrote them out. I prepared ahead, if you can believe it, for this stream. At least that part. I didn't get the new image, but I did prepare ahead that much. But some of the things we were wondering about when we put it out to everyone is Like the first one up here is like, how should we group items in the workbench? So one thing we kind of felt internally a little bit is that when you have a ton of recipes here, as they go down, especially once you get scrolling. So if you go to like the crafting station, there are, or the what's it called?
Workbench.
The workbench. Yeah, there are like, I don't know how many recipes there are. There are a lot of them though if you unlock all of them. Um, and right now we sort everything by
Alphabetical, right?
alphabetical
Yeah.
alphabetical order, which is a little bit silly because like even in this top image, right? Even if you know that it's sorted alphabetically and you're like, oh, I need the nails, you wouldn't think necessarily to go to B for basic nails, right? You'd think to go to N. Um, and so alphabetical probably isn't like the best way to sort these. So we've had like a little bit of discussions internally, like, do we want to sort it by maybe the tier of it so that all of like the stone tools go together and all of the iron tools go together. You could also imagine us sorting by something like the tool type, so all of the axes go together and all the pickaxes go together. Or you could imagine us trying both of them and seeing what works, or some third thing. So that's one of the things that we're looking out for. I mean, if any of you all have feedback, please mention it already.
Yeah,
But we're
get in the
certainly looking for that
comments.
kind of feedback if once we get it out to everyone, if they say like, hey, it's confusing, I can't find what I'm looking for, you should have this, you should sort by this, you should give the option to sort by this, something like that. So we're looking at that. We're looking at if there's any additional confusion that we've sort of introduced to the system by removing the inventory, which is possible. I mean, you can't as intuitively see what items you currently have, which could make it more confusing to see why you could or could not craft something. And then we're also looking at like, is it the case that the crafting station and the refiner look too similar to one another? They do behave a little bit differently because for the refiner, you have a crafting queue, things take a while to craft, whereas for the crafting station, they don't. They look similar, which is nice because they look very like thematically connected, which they are. But it could be the case that people are confused, like, oh, why does this one take time? This one doesn't take time. So there's still things that we're hoping to do. There are probably yet iterations to come on this like form factor of the crafting station and the refiner. Um, but that's where we are in the process now. That we're at the point where we're actually testing this as its own, almost like standalone feature. We're ready for it to go out to external folk, and we're excited to see what they think. And nervous, a little bit nervous, but mainly excited.
Confident, Luke. Project
Yeah,
confidence.
Steph was nervous. Steph mentioned that she was nervous, but I'm very confident.
Yep, it's true. Awesome. And then, so just to get to actually some questions, that's I think kind of the end of our presentation. I know we're a little behind. I wanted to give a little bit more time for Q&A. But one question that came up is, I was wondering if the crafting system comes through like the actual specific spirit and not from the workbench. Like each spirit could be responsible to some specific item. That could be really cool. I do think it's kind of interesting. There's a couple of interesting topics we've been talking about internally on the team recently about like kind of spirits should give like magical things only basically and like kind of like imbue you with like new power. Mundane things like maybe nails or something should be made through mundane resources and mundane means, kind of keeping some of that like magic and realism like separate from each other, so hopefully they both feel like kind of like distinct and unique. But actually, currently in the game, and I don't know if you've already experienced this in the demo, and I bet there's ways we could plus it up too, that I think we hope to eventually, is some spirits, when you get them, will give you recipes or, the ability to craft items that you didn't before. And Luke did this really cute icon himself for some of the recipes that are granted, because actually in some of our prototypes even we didn't tell you which ones were like from spirits. It was just like it showed up and you're like, hope you read the tooltip. But we actually put this like little badge on recipes granted to you by spirits, so hopefully it felt like a little bit more impactful, like, oh, I at least know that I got this from like one of my little buds that I collected. So that's kind of something kind of in the game, but if there's more stuff you'd want to see there, or if you haven't seen that yet, you should go play more. But if you have ideas for how that could be better, we would definitely be open to hearing that. And then another question that came up actually was, in the demo game, when you craft something, it does a sound but doesn't have a notification of what has been crafted. So that would also be cool. I do think we tried to like make sure that that would show up, but it might be a little finicky, especially if you're refining something, because the refining items go into this little box basically that you even do in the old one, so you don't quite get a notification when those finish. I hope that when you hit like say like the individual craft one, it should show up like a little banner on the left hand side. Um, but maybe that's not loud enough, so maybe that's something we could also work on, making that like a little bit more visually clear that that's happened to you.
Yeah, it can definitely get noisier over there, especially when we have the inventory as well. Um, but it should be the same notification as when you pick up an item off the ground, in theory, unless it's broken.
Oh yeah, and someone said maybe like a notification like as like text in the chat. We don't have chat in our game yet. But that's something we definitely want to do at some point. And that's a really interesting actually idea to and something we've discussed before, but maybe only for rare items. But it could be interesting, like even if you had like a personal chat, like kind of a log of those events. But we used to be like, oh, like what if when you craft like a really cool item, like a special spirit unlock, you like get like a server-wide chat notification. Could be a really kind of fun way to like ceremonialize some of that.
Yeah, that's a good idea, especially since co-op is such a big part of the draw of our game, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know how this person figured it out or if it's my fault. Grace asks, is Luke the one that does comics too? Sorry, Luke, if I outed you.
Yeah, I got added. Yeah, I do occasionally draw comics. It's been a while since I've made one though, but it's Bowl of Beans is my comic alter ego.
And it's really funny. Definitely. And Luke is a great artist, actually. I feel like one of the cool things about him working on UI, both being able to do this like functional back end, like heavy engineering lift, but also Luke is a great like just visual designer and artist. And so I think that's like a really, I don't know, a cool coming together of your like different talents like into game development is like a really, I don't know, it's like a unique thing.
That's very nice. Although I will say that, one thinks they're a good artist and then some bitch throw up a mock-up that looks like so good and so complete, which is very nice. We love
Very
these.
humbling, yeah.
Yeah, it's humbling. Yeah, I'm often humbled, I find, in my life.
We have another question. Is that an Easter egg? Will we have to collect poop from bullwogs? Uh, and Billy asked, what would we call bullwog poop? Uh, don't currently have any plans for collectible poop mini games. I'm so sorry. But if you want to see that feature, you should go post it on our feature upvote board, where you and other community members could put your weight behind that request.
Good
um,
job throwing off the scent, Steph. And that feature we're definitely gonna add.
yeah, they don't know. Let's see. And there's a couple of suggestions. So actually, like you should go read through maybe the chat log too for some. They had some commentary on your questions, like filter
Yeah.
buttons so people can search by function or material. Sorting by type is something that Augie definitely wants. It sounds like, and maybe
Mhm.
one for alphabetical too. Um,
Yeah, I definitely like the idea of having some kind of filter buttons up at the top, maybe here of the like above the list of recipes. You could have like little tiles that say, yeah, by tier or potentially by other things, if because like not all stations necessarily have different tiered resources. But I definitely think as we progress into the game, there's going to be too many recipes that you don't want to scroll through all of them. So I like the idea of filtering a lot.
that's actually a really good callback to something Luke said earlier in the stream too, where sometimes when you're trying to figure out like really how do I communicate this thing, like is the UI the problem, and sometimes it's not. There's a like imagine a world where we only had one workbench in the whole game. There's no UI you could possibly make that it would make the like 500 recipes like easy to navigate through. And so it's actually sometimes when you have to like a scenario like that could be when you have to like look back at the feature and be like, actually should all of these things be on this specific workbench, or do we have enough say like tools that like tools should be their own things and a material bench should be its own thing. So it's like a kind of really interesting like intersection of that problem where it's like, okay, cool, you can add like this quality of life feature, you can add searching, but it's like eventually even searching like through a 500 item list is going to really suck. And so maybe there are other answers to how you actually like navigate that problem other than just adding like features to the UI basically.
Yeah, definitely another example of like sometimes you find that if something is hard enough to communicate it in the UI or the UX, it indicates that maybe the feature itself needs to be changed a little bit instead of just the way that you present it to players. So that yeah, this would be another example of that potentially.
So are there any other questions in the chat? I don't know if I missed some too, so if you posted one and I didn't announce it, please repost it. 'Cause I was trying to scroll up and down, but I just got my 2 monitor setup back today, actually. So I'm like re-entering the world where I have more than one monitor, and it is amazing. I love it. And then one thing, actually, because I think we have a few spare minutes while we see if anyone has any questions, is we have a little sneak peek at actually a feature that's pretty early into its iteration, something that came directly from community feedback. And honestly, we were actually planning to do it much later in our development cycle until we saw how many people in the demo like wanted and needed this feature to be able to play. Um, so I have a sneak peek that I put way down here just so we wouldn't accidentally. I even have an update actually for this today. But something that came up a lot from the public playtest and the demo that we did was keybinds. And keybinds not just as like because they don't like the mapping necessarily of like what we picked, but also like of an accessibility concern and also like a localization concern. Like some people have different keyboards with like different layouts, and it's actually really hard to like play on like say like an AZERTY keyboard on our game because like I think literally it's like left and forward are like swapped, and so it's like really confusing to try to play on that kind of layout when it's intuitive for like an English US keyboard but not for someone else's keyboard. So this is something even we're trying. It has a big technical lift actually behind it. Like our inputs aren't set up automatically this way to just work, and so we had to do this like push and pull of like, okay, well I could design a UI, but like let's see what's even like technically possible, and like let's get that functional and playable. So we kind of whiteboarded just enough to like get some idea. We pulled some reference from some other games. Meg, who is an awesome engineer on our team, got a version of this like working really early, so that we could actually like map some like control settings. I did like a wireframe over that to try to kind of see like, hey, how are we gonna take this very like rough version and get it into a state where like we think it might be presentable for like a playtest group. And actually, and God, I hope I don't leak my Slack on accident, I'm gonna post the latest picture too of like what we currently have in the game because we actually just did some updates to this menu that just got submitted today, and I have the power, unlike Luke, to add stuff to the board real time.
Oh my
God. But yeah, and so this is kind of where we're currently at, actually. So we're able, you'll see this controller one is unfortunately grayed out. We're trying to see if that's something that we can also like ladder into this version and ship to the build, but we're still working on that. It's its own challenge on top of just mappable inputs. But and I'm not like a super UI expert, honestly. I often live in the wireframe land, but I learned from really awesome people like Luke and Meg and Billy on how to kind of get some like visual polish onto some of these assets once they're kind of in game. So like Meg did this version, I did a wireframe. She actually set it up mostly in this shape for me because I can only do like a subset of some of the styling with like just my current UI proficiency in the engine. And then I did this pass on top of that to try to get it even closer into the shape, mess with the spacing, hopefully make it a little bit more readable. So hopefully by the next time we update the demo, you'll actually be able to remap your keybinds. Well, both you'll be able to reference what they are, so you'll know what they are, because that was also a lot of feedback that we got of like, what are even the controls? I don't know. But on top of that, you'll be able to customize them, which will be hopefully really exciting. I'm really excited to get this feature out, and sorry to the people who didn't have this feature and needed it in the demo, but thank you so much for your feedback, because honestly, it really makes a difference, because we didn't realize how important this feature was going to be to how many players it was, and it was something that was going to come in much, much later into our process, but we bumped it up because we realized how many people in the community needed this from the feedback that we got. So it's really awesome, both like coming together of like how we put out one iteration of the game itself, we got a bunch of feedback, and based off of that feedback, we actually changed what we were planning to work on so that we could try to like actually have the right balance of like adding just like new content and features that we think the game needs, but also prioritize what the community is telling us that they need. So it's really awesome. I'm excited to be able to foreshadow this for you guys a little bit, and really excited that this is in the game.
Yeah, I second all of that.
Yeah, sorry, I was just like, I went. But yeah, so hopefully that'll be a really exciting feature. Not a question, but I want to say I absolutely love the sunsets and the look of the world you created. Thank you. We get a lot of feedback on our art.
Yeah,
our art team is crushing it, honestly. They're amazing. Big idea from Sebul underscore TTV, who I think has not been in the streams maybe before, at least not chatted a lot. Big idea. Chat box that just parses your text and performs the UI tasks automatically. Name Craft GPT. So Luke, you on that?
Yeah, I'm on it. That's how we get another round of funding. I feel we just have to somehow pivot to be an AI company, and then we're good.
The
We never even
classic
have to
VC
release the game.
startup.
Then we can just go through, get a few more $1 million, and that's it.
That was the plan all along. Awesome. Any other questions? Anything that people want to know about? It could be about like the UI and UX stuff that we shared. It could also be about the game generally. It could be about Luke's comics if you want to know more about Luke's comics.
Oh God.
Luke is also, I think Cheery mentioned it in chat, the person who drew our Discord emotes. That someday when we hit Twitch affiliate, if it ever happens, we will add to our Twitch. Kind of toxic that they don't let you have it.
I think some of the Discord emotes were drawn by other people as well.
Sure, but you did
they
the
dropped
Hob
them.
Champ, which is the most important one.
The Hob Champ, yeah. The one that we need in Twitch, you know.
Yeah, we do need the Hob Champ in Twitch. It's so important. Aw, you guys are so nice. Grace said they are amazing, I think in reference to the emotes. Lambie said, why are y'all so awesome with this game? Like, for real. Oh, Lambie, I'm so sorry I didn't get to tune in for your stream the other day, by the way. We actually, there's a whole thing. We found, like, a lost dog. We had to return it, and I just, like, forgot anything I had planned to do. But I hope your stream went well. I was glad to watch you play the other day. Awesome. Well, if there's no other real questions in the chat, hopefully you enjoyed this dev stream and the sneak peek of the keybinds and this kind of like look behind the curtain at how some of our features go from like this very early stage up until, you know, in your hands and ready for your feedback. So hopefully you enjoyed that. If you do think of anything, any questions, feel free to post them in our Discord afterward. We're often lurking in there trying to figure out how we can kind of input and answer any questions that you guys have. So if you do have anything that comes up, don't hesitate to reach out. But thanks so much for tuning in. This is really fun. And thanks, Luke, for joining our dev stream for the first time. Woo!
Yeah, thanks everyone. This is super fun.
So hopefully we'll get him back for future streams. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Hopefully we'll have another one of these in a few weeks. And we'll have a playtest soon. We are working on our build for that now, and we hope that next week we'll both launch a playtest, not a demo build, but a playtest to the internal playtesting group, and we will be sending out a new wave of invites. So if you are excited to playtest and you haven't yet registered, you can go to our playtest sign up channel in Discord, and there is a link for you to fill out. It has like an NDA and asks you some information, but fill that out. And we're going to be sending a new wave of invites for that playtest. So if you're excited, that's the way to see new content. Some people have already done it. Thanks for doing that. Really excited. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.
I'm going to do a peace sign, Luke. Come on.
Actually, I don't have the Twitch stream open, so I can't see you. So.
Oh, right.
I didn't know you were doing a peace sign.
Yeah, the classic. So thanks, y'all. See you next time.